seen from the Hubble telescope in Earth's orbit. This image was snapped from the Curiosity rover on the surface of Mars. Space travel has captured our imagination and elevated our sense of human potential. Some have suggested the colonization of Mars as our next step in the conquest of space and to save the human race from self-destruction here on planet Earth. The cost of these proposals range from tens of billions of dollars to over $2 trillion, an exciting and a daunting prospect. Before you lay down your deposit on the first oceanfront Martian condo, oh wait, no oceans on Mars, let me raise a few questions. Is the goal of colonizing Mars worthy of the cost? Is it rational? Since the 18th century Enlightenment, science has dazzled us with its discoveries and possibilities. We can now map the human genome, video chat with astronauts in orbit, and clone animals, feats that were unthinkable when I was born. I will offer the radical notion that it is the humanities that hold the future to the human civilization, a return to roots or basic principles. So our current educational system has become dominated by STEM. Educators and politicians promote STEM as in the interest of national security, to promote economic growth, and for personal health and safety. Science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. I believe that the humanities, as I said, hold the key to the future of the human race. Keep in mind that the first universities were founded in the Middle Ages around the humanities. The humanities aim to transform pupils intellectually and spiritually, preparing them for public life. My aim is not to denigrate science. As a teacher of history and philosophy, I respect science and value it for its important project of explaining nature. That is one definition of science. However, when we discuss issues like Mars exploration, this definition of science is often replaced subtly by a more problematic philosophical position. The scientific method is the only valid one for establishing truths. Science answers the questions, how can we? But we must also ask whether and why we should, and at what cost. We must be wary of reductive thinking, that all reality can be explained by a single principle. Whether it's Marxism or Freudian psychology, reductive theories attempt to force a complex reality into a simplified intellectual framework. Though appealing, reductive theories can be dangerous. Science is a powerful tool, but it is not the only tool. As Maslow quipped, if the only tool you have is a hammer, everything starts to look like a nail. Perhaps the future of humanity lies in not our mastery of nature, but in our self-control and prudence. So let me sketch a humbler and saner path forward, the project of civilization. Civilization could be defined as the creation and transmission from one generation to the next of human institutions, practices, and culture. Civilizations are fragile creations, not susceptible to explanation or control by the natural sciences. There are no guarantees of their survival. In fact, most commonly they go extinct. Past examples of collapsed civilization may illuminate our own situation. To explain how civilizations and societies develop and evolve, we must glean wisdom from the humanities. Anthropology and geography provide evidence for the successes and failures of past peoples. Each collapsed civilization represented a unique culture and approach to its environment. However, similar failures doom them. Civilizations expire due to depletion of resources, conquest, and overexpansion, a problem that affects empires. The Aztecs, for example, represented here by their remarkable capital city of Tenochtitlan, overexpanded their empire, setting the stage for their conquest, with pandemic disease doing the rest. Several years ago, we took a trip out west to visit Mesa Verde, where the ancient Anasazi carved these cities out of the cliffs, leaving these mysterious and silent sentinels. I left with a deep sense of mystery and sadness that such a creative experiment could not be sustained. Questions remain as to whether warfare, climate change, or deforestation ended this unique culture. Could our global civilization suffer a similar fate? Our faith in science and technology may lead us to conclude falsely that we are insulated from civilizational collapse. It is the task of the humanities, especially history, to help us learn from experience. History is an experiment. It's a one-time, non-repeatable experiment in human decision-making that must be understood by looking back so that we may look forward with a healthy dose of skepticism toward magic bullets. Science does give us knowledge, but it does not impart wisdom or judgment. Science can give us control over nature, but it does not give us control over ourselves or mend our moral flaws. Wisdom and judgment arise from experience. And while theory can aid experience, it cannot replace it. We must look to the past to be able to understand how we can make decisions for the future. Whether they draw from Sophocles, Shakespeare, or Sarajevo in 1914, decision makers must temper their rosy optimism with such examples. After all, grand designs can often go horribly awry according to the law of unintended consequences. No better example supports this law than Europe on the eve of the First World War. This conflict was preceded by a crescendo of scientific discoveries and inventions. Evolution, genetics, psychoanalysis, relativity, petroleum, the automobile, airplanes, electricity, telephone, the radio, and 100 other dazzling displays of ingenuity. In the grips of technological utopianism and confident and elaborate military plans, leaders and nations embarked enthusiastically upon a conflict that almost destroyed Western civilization. Let's remember that the internet and social media was touted by forecasters as ushering in a new age of democracy. Can we stand amid our current political climate and say that the promises of Silicon Valley have been realized? On this point, we can learn from the most famous foreign observer to the United States, Alexis de Tocqueville. Tocqueville located the health of American democracy in our myriad web of local associations, which provided for face-to-face contact around joint projects and ventures. The current state of these local associations has been harmed by easy entry and easy exit virtual communities. Such mediating institutions are the heart and lungs of any healthy democracy and cannot be replaced with cyber transplants. Finally, looking to literature and the arts. They remind us of the tragic nature of the human condition. The advance of scientific knowledge, both theoretical and practical, is essential to the story of civilization. But it must be balanced by the insight that human beings are fallen creatures. As the main characters in Macbeth and Oedipus Rex remind us. These stories show us human inclination towards short-sightedness, self-destruction, and blindness. As revealed in this quote by Michel de Montaigne. He said, "Man is certainly stark mad. He cannot make a flea, but he makes Scots by the dozens." So, humanities should not contradict scientific facts per se, but as in the case of philosophy, it must examine scientific claims and examine them and supplement them with other perspectives. Our political system is fractured, our infrastructure in a state of disrepair, as represented by this recent report card from the American Society of Civil Engineers, and our planet is gasping for air. These questions are partly scientific, but they are also more fundamentally moral. They involve the ability or inability of humans to control what we create and anticipate the negative consequences of our actions. Does it mend our flaws to transport them at steep cost to a distant planet with no oxygen, no liquid water, and no vegetation? Human beings evolved in the presence of planet Earth, which is perfectly suited for our survival. So our predicament calls for the accumulated wisdom of the ages, not merely the tools of science. Human failure often arises from dogmatism and blindness, both religious and secular, as I said before in this quote from Michel de Montaigne. In fact, I can recommend no better companion on the twisting, torturous journey of civilization than the 16th century skeptical thinker who lived and wrote during the Renaissance and the religious wars. In fact, he also displayed a keen sense of humor directed against the pretentious. Upon the highest throne in the world, we are seated still upon our arses. I began with images from Mars, from space, and from the Curiosity rover. So let me bookend them with similar images from Earth. This one from far space, and this one from the International Space Station. As we contemplate our planet from a distance, let's remember that we know more about the furthest reaches of space than we do about our deepest oceans and about the human spirit. A humanist education reminds us that human reason is limited, that we are not gods on earth, that sometimes our designs rebound against us, that we can be our own worst enemies, and that sometimes the best we can do is prevent things from getting worse. Now that we're back to our earthly home, let me close with a few thoughts from a recent historical figure I admire, Václav Havel. In his native Czechoslovakia, Havel went from dissident playwright to its president after the collapse of communism. He called on his fellow citizens to draw from their humanity and their spirit in making a new nation. He said, the salvation of this world lies in the human heart and the human ability to reflect, in human meekness and responsibility, and warned the tragedy of modern man is not that he knows less and less about the meaning of his own life, but that he cares less and less. I think given his experience with communism in Eastern Europe, Havel would have agreed with this sentiment. Show me a civilization with a thriving humanities, and I will show you a free one. So let's double down on planet Earth. Let's go all in on the messy reality of humanity, rather than transporting our civilization afar, the seduction of another planet. Our planet is perfectly suited for our survival, and the journey begins not in going big, but in coming home. And the humility that comes from studying the humanities as a partner to the noble scientific project of explaining nature.